John Bull. I've been guiding in this area for about 12 years. I am a full-time school teacher, which means I teach science. I also teach kids with learning disabilities. I'm currently the dean of students at my school. I try to incorporate instruction in my classroom. I try to incorporate fishing into my classroom as much as possible. I have the coolest field trips of any teacher that I know. I take a group every year to go see Gina at the redfish hatchery. I take group fishing. At the end of this month, I take 36 kids down to sea camp at Big Pine Key. And where else have I taken kids? If it involves fishing or involves the water or whatever, I'm taking the kids on that field trip. And I try to incorporate fishing as much as I can into my instruction, especially when we talk about ecosystems. And then when I'm out on the water with clients, I try to bring the classroom out to the boat. I find that my charters end up being more instructional based and scientific based, and the fishing is just secondary. That's the bonus part. Steve asked me to come and talk. I was racking my brain as far as what I can talk about, because I'm sure you've heard every single song and dance there is. But my specialty really is fly fishing. Like John Hand, I love the sport of fly fishing. I got into it probably about a year after I started guiding, and that was the end of it. And now a lot of my charters end up being fly fishing instructional based. This time of year is my prime time where I actually see clients. During the summer I don't do so much. I'm usually having my own personal time for larger friends out in the water. And spend a lot of time doing some tarpon on fly, especially during the summertime. But pretty much from October through the end of March, April, I'm working this area around here for redfish and trout, snook, sight casting on fly. So in light of that, I decided to talk to you guys tonight about wintertime fishing and what you can do to up your catch, and if anything else, maybe start to notice some of the signs, because the fish and the other wildlife that is out there will tell you where you need to go and what you need to do. I usually use 3 or 4 signs that tell me where the fish are. First of all, I always know where what the tides do. We all check tides. We all have our own spots that we want to go to. But when you go out to this flat here north of us at Simmons Park, it's a big expansive flat. Those fish can be anywhere. I'm usually looking for wading birds. That is my number one marker to find fish, especially on an incoming tide. And there's one bird in particular I look for. Does anybody want to take a shot at it? This is the teacher coming out, so you have to get over it. Anybody want to take a shot? One bird. Osprey? Coomerang. Nope. Nope.
Heron.
Pelican.
Pelican.
Those are good, but no.
Heron.
Seagull.
Who said heron? The gray blue heron. My rule of thumb, and I teach the kids this in my class, they get a laugh out of it because I get to say the word butt in class. The great blue heron. They stand, probably about that tall, something like that.
Sure.
And his butt is right about here. Okay? When I'm out on the flats, especially now this time of year, because we have really low tides, the lowest tides that there are. If I'm out on the flats, and I learned this kayak fishing, because kayak fishing, you have to slow it. You force yourself to slow down. You force yourself to work one particular area and work it to death. I do the same thing in my skiff. I pull 100% of the time. When you're out there on the flats, you want to look for a great blue heron. If you see more than half his legs out of the water, you don't want to fish there yet. You want to try and find deeper water in front of him. But you want to keep in mind where that great blue heron is, because when you come back and the tide's up a little higher and his butt is touching the water, that's where you want to fish. Because at that point in time, you're looking at about knee to thigh-high depth water, which is perfect sight casting for redfish, snook, and trout depth water. And that great blue heron is going after the same food that your snook, reds, and trout are going after. So you want to try and keep those sort of things in the back of your mind. The other thing that I like to look for is mullet. A friend of mine, Captain Jeffrey Page, always said, Bully, you want to find the redfish, find the mullet. All right? So I always look for mullet. If you have mullet, that means there's tide moving. If If you have mullet, that means they're jumping, they're scooting through the grass, they're doing their little thing, and they're kicking up the substrate along the bottom of the grass. And as they kick it up, they're shooting up all sorts of little crabs and shrimp and little bait fish. And more often than not, I have seen redfish swimming in with schools of mullet. We all have seen that. That's the reason why they do it. They have a symbiotic, or not a symbiotic relationship, but a mutualism relationship. The fish, the redfish, follow in behind the mullet and they get their free meal, kind of like a cobia on a manatee or a cobia on a stingray. Redfish do the same thing. I've actually had redfish follow my boat. If I'm kicking up enough mud behind me when I'm pulling, I've actually turned around and seen redfish kind of just scooting back behind the boat looking for a free meal. Bonnethead sharks would do that too. Someone mentioned pelicans. Obviously, pelicans are a great sign in terms of birds. The pelicans, obviously, they're diving, they're hitting bait. If they're hitting bait, there's something pushing the bait up to the surface. There's probably stuff that's going to come from the commotion. That's another great sign. Rays, manatees, anything moving on the flats. That tells me that that flat is alive. There's water moving there. If I see an abundance of sharks that are actively engaged in feeding or hunting, obviously water's moving, that flat is alive. And at this time of the year, we have ultra clear water, very skinny water, which means we're able to see a lot better than we can come May, June, July, August, September, when the water's kind of darker and it's deeper. Okay. Low tide fishing is my favorite. If I had to pick the perfect scenario, I would want to have a really cold night down in the 50s, negative low tide, and then an incoming high tide at maybe noon, 1 o'clock, something like that. Maybe a low tide like at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, high tide at noon, 1 o'clock. Because what that's going to do, look at the biology of the mud, that mud is going to get cold overnight. There's all sorts of little marine worms, which actually redfish feed on marine worms more than we give them credit for, especially during the wintertime. There's a lot of marine worms, crabs, and shrimp. They live down in the mud and the substrate. What happens is they get very compact because that mud will retain heat, so they're going to settle down and just, wait until that water comes over. Well, with that mud retaining that heat, when the tide comes up onto the flat, that water that comes over that hot mud acts as a sauna. It's going to be a couple degrees warmer than some of the deeper water. That'll make a world of difference. Not only when that water comes up and the sun's baking on that mud, all those little creepy crawlies get activated and they come up out of the mud and the redfish just come up and they'll start picking them off. You can see it happen all the time. And the birds will actually tell you when that's starting to happen because you'll see other birds. You'll see spoonbills, ibises, the little plover guys. If you see them digging around in the mud, there's abundance of life in that mud. All it takes is some sun to activate them and some water to cover them, and they're going to start coming out, and that's when the redfish are going to start feeding. And that's when you start getting into your tailing redfish situations, when they start digging in the mud. Let's see, what else about wintertime fishing? The water's really clear, so I tend to scale down not only the size of my gear, but also the weight of my leader. What standard size leader? What leader
20.
size do you guys use? 20? What do you use?
15.
15. In the wintertime, I never go higher than 15, and sometimes I'll even put on 12. If I'm targeting redfish and trout, there ain't nothing they can break me off on. Usually I'm out on the open flats. I like the fight. The water is more oxygenated, so they're going to be able to sustain a little bit longer fight. I can play them out. I use very light rods. So sometimes I'll drop down. I'll always have at least 15, or sometimes I'll drop down to 12 if it's really clear water. Summertime, I'm up around 25, 30, unless I'm working docks and throw a little heavier on there. The jig heads, I pretty much live on 2 baits. I'm a big mirror lure guy, so I like these little johns. Throw a little shrimp sauce on them with a little 1/8 ounce jig head. I want a nice soft presentation, something that's brown, something that looks natural, like shrimp or crab or a marine worm. something that's just going to add a little puff of sand when it goes over it. A friend of mine over on the East Coast, John Comiskey, used to teach me in the wintertime, it's all about down and brown. And he's talking about fly color, but the same applies to baits. In clear water, you want something with a more natural presentation because those fish are going to examine that bait maybe for just a split second longer in that clear water. You want it to look as natural as possible and blend in with the bottom as much as possible. So I like these little jigs, something that lands soft, I can still cast it a long way, but I want to have it connected to a trace of 15-pound leader.
What size jig head is that?
1/8 ounce. Yeah, it's a hookup jig or whatever. But for the little johns, I pretty much just use 3 colors. And in the wintertime, it's always golden brim. You know, this is pretty much the only color I'll throw. Summertime, I'll throw, what's the other color I got? Summertime, you know, again, being a fly fisherman, I'm going to try to match the hatch. I'll go with something that looks a little bit more bait fishy. I think this is called molting. And then if I'm out on the beach chasing snook, I'll go to something more white, you know, or pearl or whatever. But I try to make things as simple as possible when I fish. I don't try to complex it, especially with spin tackle. You know, I own 2 spinning setups that I take out with clients. The way I see it is we can only use 1 rod at a time. So there's no sense in having 25 rods on the boat. So I usually don't have 1 or 2 people out, so if they each have a rod, we're good to go. Just tie and change out baits as needed. If you guys have any questions, feel free to stop me as I go. I don't use very long rods. This is a 6'7" rod. I'm able to cast this far enough to be able to get out and still have a stealthy presentation. The other rod I have is a 7'2", I think. This is the 6'7". Oh no, this is the 6'3". This is the 6'7". Actually made by a local company called Omen. They're out of Tampa. A buddy of mine owns a tackle shop in Lakeland, carries them. He said, "Here, try these out. Tell me what you think." I love them. But that's pretty much. I try to keep it as simple as possible. I know you guys have a trout tournament coming up. And before I talk about the fly rod, you know, I figured I'd cover the trout tournament. You know, we're catching trout. I mean, you can catch trout all over the place this time of year, as far south as Sarasota Bay. If you go to the flat right out in front of Kitchen Key on an incoming tide, I've had 250 trout days out on those flats from Kitchen Key south to Long Bar, and just working pothole to pothole to pothole. Funny thing about trout is I find that the bigger ones are on the smaller potholes down there. Bigger ones on the smaller potholes, usually 1 or 2. Big potholes are going to have a bunch of smaller size, and trout tend to hang together in the same size down in Sarasota Bay. And I'll usually work either one of these jigs, Mirrodine, I like the little mirror lure, the little mirror glass thing, or I'll throw, you know, if I'm wanting to cover a lot of water, I'll throw the Aqua Dream spoon. This one's all beat up from Spanish mackerel. They like this spoon too.
You use that for trout as well?
Yeah. Trout, for some reason, trout and redfish. If I'm going and fishing for trout and redfish, there's going to be some form of chartreuse in it. I don't know why, but that Aqua Dream spoon, I've caught quite a few reds and quite a few trout on the green. And with the little johns, it's hard for me not to use a chartreuse head. It might just be me. And then I have topwater plugs that I throw, and they're always in the bright chartreuse colors. It might be my thing. But I tend to catch a lot on chartreuse. A lot of the flies that I use have some form of chartreuse in them. Just trout seem to like that color. If I were going out, you know, the one lure challenge, if I were going out and it was a trout tournament or something like that, I guarantee you, whatever lure, the one lure that I would take, it would have some form of chartreuse in it, whether it be a jig, whether it be a spoon, whether it be a topwater plug, or a suspending bait like Mirrodine, something like that. You know, that's what I would kind of focus on with you guys heading into this trout tournament. I think that would be a good starting point. You know, locations. You know, how far south can they go?
All of Tampa Bay.
All of 10. Can they go down to Sarasota Bay? How far, like, what's the southern,
Whatever that ditch is, I don't even know what it's called.
like Manatee River? Okay.
That's outside of Tampa Bay.
Yeah,
Right there, just above the Manatee is where the.
right where Anna Maria comes in.
Yeah,
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, not quite.
Okay, so you can go down to 64 where you can't.
Yeah.
Okay. Down there, if you wanted to head that far south, you know, you have Palmasola Bay, which has a lot of trout in it. Good red fishing right now. Further south than that, which is probably past your boundary, which is just past the Cortez Bridge, that's where Kitchen Key is. That flat is always lousy with trout. You know, some days you get really big ones, and other days you get a ton of little ones. But definitely, I find that the closer to the channel you get, incoming tide on the smaller potholes, those big trout hang in there pretty good. And then, of course, you know, I mean, Fort DeSoto, you know, there's big trout over there, and they get worked over quite a bit. The other big thing with wintertime fishing, and it's kind of a catch-22 because I'm originally from Connecticut. I live down here for a reason, just like he lives down here for a reason, just like Brian. You live down. I don't want to get cold. I don't like getting cold, but in the wintertime, you have to be willing to get out of the boat, especially if you're fishing for trout and redfish, especially if you're in a tournament, especially for me, because again, I don't have a trolling motor on my boat. I pole exclusively, which means if I'm fishing a tournament, one person's got a rod in the water, the other person's pulling. It's usually me who's pulling. So a lot of times when I'm fishing tournaments, like when I do my red fly tournament at the beginning of January, me and my buddy will bail out and we'll have 2 fly rods going out in the water. We'll wait around and see what we can find to try and maximize as many lines as we can in the water. But over at Fort DeSoto, I mean, you could work the north end of Tarpon Key. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to bail out and work the shallow edges, because that's where your big trout are going to be. Trout are real funny. They've got biologically, they have one of, if not the best eyesight of the inshore fish species in Florida. Their eyes are very similar to a cat, which means they can absorb a lot of light, which is why they're very active at night. They could probably, a trout sitting right here in the dark would be able to see a guy standing on a boat over by that piano. And they also can feel every single vibration. That's why big trout are the spookiest. They got big for that reason, but they have incredible eyesight. So bailing out of your boat and waiting for trout is a really good idea because it gives you a lower silhouette. You're able to be quiet, and both you and your partner are obviously able to spread out and cover an area. If you're working a hole, you can go on either side. Any questions on spin tap?
Yeah, where's your favorite redfish hole?
What's that? Where's my favorite redfish hole? That's classified. I actually have one right near where you're giving the place to stay away. It's my or the hotel place. There's one spot, I ain't gonna tell you, but there's one spot down around Longboat Key that I started spring break of '95, '96. And I would always go, my family would go down there for vacation, and I'd always drive by the spot, and I'm like, God, that looks good. You know, I just got to figure out how to get there. Well, one day I walked and finally figured out how to get back there, and I caught all of my firsts in this hole. First snook, 29 inches. First redfish, 27 inches. First trout. I've caught every fish species with the exception of tarpon, cobia, triple tail, perm, I mean, you know, the offshore stuff, in this hole. I've caught baby jewfish on fly in this hole. Baby gag grouper on fly. Baby barracuda, mangrove snapper, black drum, pompano, jack, snook, trout, reds, little sharks, all out of this one hole. They come in and they come out. And there's only one way in, one way out.
What city is this?
Sarasota Bay. And here's the funny
Saw
part.
while he was driving, so we got that down.
Here's the funny part. The funny part is when I go in there, the only thing I take with me is a 1/4 ounce crocodile spoon, with a treble hook on it.
Does the hole have a name?
Yeah, John's hole.
John, that's between you and your proctologist.
It's John's hole part 1. That's part 2.
But is there a plate, does it have a name?
No, it doesn't
Because
actually.
I don't want to know what the name is, but I think I know what you're talking about.
I don't know what the name is. No one's ever there. I don't know why, but they totally miss out. I love the place. And I was fishing West Coast Redfish Tour with a buddy of mine a couple years ago, and we ended up finishing 7th, which was the first place out of the money. I was fishing on my buddy's Pathfinder, and I caught all 5 of our fish. And of course, we win a power pole sock, to put over his power pole. I caught all the fish. He got the prize for his boat. I didn't get nothing on it. I caught all the fish. But we were kind of running late in the day. We had a couple fish, and we wanted to get a couple more. And I said, look, let's go to this spot. We've been there before when we fished the Extreme Redfish Tour. I got some crocodiles, but he's like, oh, no, I don't want to go back. Come on, let's just go back there. And sure enough, I busted out 2 fish within 10 minutes on that silver crocodile spoon. And he's sitting there using gulps and jigs and everything else he can think of. And friggin' crocodile spoon. Every time. I don't know why. But I've been using that one lure in this hole for the better part of 16 years. And it never lets me down. Now lately I've been using more of the jigs in the wintertime, but come spring through November, it's crazy. And they're always in there. There's usually some decent sized reds in there. But if you can get, if you can get over to DeSoto, obviously, you know there's big trout over there. You just got to be very patient. You got to be very stealthy. Don't be afraid to bail out and wade, and stick with what I like to call search baits. I usually use a lot of search baits: spoons, mirrodines, topwaters, things I can throw a long way, cover a lot of ground in every cast. That way, I'm maximizing every single cast. Redfish, different story. Usually, I'm sight casting redfish. So I'll go to more what I call sight baits, which would be your jigs, your DOA shrimp, or sometimes I'll hook up a live shrimp on a circle hook. That's if I'm fishing spin. That being said, usually when I'm fishing for redfish, this is what I have in my hand. I am addicted to a 6-weight fly rod. This thing right here is my form of drugs. This is the most addictive drug on the planet. It's something that's not for everyone. A lot of people say it's too much work. A lot of people say you don't catch enough fish. I always tell people that come out on my boat and they ask me about fly fishing, or if I'm at a show or whatever, I tell them, don't do it unless you've caught all the fish that you want to catch on spin gear. Because your numbers are not going to be high, but they're going to be much more memorable and much more quality. I can probably remember 90% of the redfish I've ever caught on fly. Not because they were big, not because it was in this great location. It's because I can remember every situation, and I can remember that tape. When you watch that fish work on the fly, and you know it's a player, and I call them players. They're the ones that have their bellies up against the ground, and they're just sort of just milling about. They're not spooked. They're very calm. They're very relaxed. They're happy fish. They don't even have to be tailing. They can just be laid up. And when they turn on it, and those fins flare out, and they light up, and you see all of that happen in 6 inches of water, 20 feet away from you, it's over. It's done. The gentleman over here talking earlier, he's like, oh, I want to do it more, but I haven't done it too much in saltwater. You have to force yourself. You have to say, okay, I am going out on my boat, and I am not taking a spin rod. You have to force yourself to do it. Because if you take that spin rod, you're like, I like catching fish as much as the next guy. But you'll end up going back to that spin rod because you want to catch fish. This is going to force you to use it in order to catch fish. Believe it or not, I never, and this is the God's honest truth, I never took a casting lesson. never. I went out, I said, all right, I'm going wading on the backside of Perico Island, right there in that little channel. I know there's trout there, and I'm just gonna fish and fish and fish, and knowing that's not my spot.
Or is it?
No, it's not. No, you go there. You'll catch fish there. Don't get me wrong. That's not it. But that was one of the first spots I ever fished because I used to see it going down 64. But that's not it. And I actually practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and watched videos, or I actually watched Flip Pallet and I watched Jose. And you know, I patterned what they did. And I patterned how they did it. And I actually taught myself how to fly fish. I never took a lesson. And it's really hard for me to give a casting lesson. That's the guy you want to take a casting lesson from. John can teach you how to cast. It's the one thing I can't teach it because I just do it. And I'm not FFF certified. If they were to examine me and look at my cast, they'd probably say I have about 150 holes in my cast and it looks horrible. As long as I get to fly out there, I can present it to the fish. I don't care what the cast looks like. I've seen some ugly casts that have been incredibly effective, and I've seen some beautiful casts and they catch nothing. But you definitely have to force yourself to do it. And we live in probably one of the most underrated fly fishing locations in Florida. You know, you always hear about the Keys, which the Keys is the Keys. I mean, you can't beat it. You always hear about Mosquito Lagoon, which again, amazing red fishery. You hear about Biscayne Bay, 10,000 Islands, Flamingo, all these great fly fishing locations, Charlotte Harbor. To me, Tampa Bay is one of those extremely, extremely underrated fly fishing locations because it's a live bait fishery. You know, a lot of our charter boats, you know, the towers fill up the greenbacks and they go and they melee the fish and they do a fabulous job doing it. But in the winter time, this piece of equipment, if I'm fishing a tournament, spin, fly, or whatever, if I'm fishing a tournament and everybody else is fishing spin tackle and it's for redfish and it's in the wintertime, I'm taking this and I'm not taking one of those. Because I have more confidence in sight fishing with this than I do with spin rod. Because as long as I can see that fish, as long as they're within 30 or 40 feet, if they're a player, I can pretty much bet that fish is going to eat as long as I put it in front. Now, sometimes it don't work out, but we have an amazing red fishery, and the water gets so clear on the South Shore. The sight casting is amazing. If you can just learn to read those, the signs from the birds, follow the tides, follow the other wildlife that are out there, you know, showing you what's going on, the fish will be there. You just have to slow down and take your time. I work, like I said earlier, I'm the Gulf Coast sales rep for Ancona Boats. We sell the native SUV 17, the Copperhead, the Cayenne, which was actually named after my wife, the Shadowcast, which was named after me, and we're also coming out with a couple other models that we'll have at the expo at the end of the month. And these are all pulling skiffs. Kind of, you know, John runs a hell of a bay. You slow down, you have a higher vantage point, you're able to get in skinny water. I float in 5 inches all day long, and it's dead quiet. And I'm able to get back to where only the kayakers get to, but then I can also pull out of there, pick up and run my motor. Being able to get in that kind of skinny water and have that height advantage of being in a skiff or being on a casting platform, this piece of equipment here really takes off, and it improves. It doesn't make you a better fisherman, but it makes you a better angler, and it makes you aware of what's going on around you. You know, you can, and I don't knock anyone in whatever they have, but you can be in a bay boat with a 220 horsepower Yamaha or whatever it is, and you can be screaming up and down the flats. But once you stop, you slow down, you're pulling and you're sight fishing, you really start to take in what we have here, not only in Tampa Bay, but in the rest of the state. You really start to understand why the fish behave the way they do, why they do things, what they look like right when they're going to eat. You what they look like when they're not in the mood to eat. The fish will tell you what they want. But if you've never tried fly fishing, it's I don't have words for it. It's by and far my favorite way to fish, and you have a body of water that is very, very, very conducive to it, and it doesn't even have to be sight casting. Summertime, if you go hit up Josh for a place to stay, you fall out of his place, you walk up and down the beach, there's snook right there. I had the first fish on the 8-weight this summer, or Mother's Day. I go out, we always stay at Silver Surf. I walk out on Silver Surf in Anna Maria, and usually there's snook out there. I go out there and I see these fish milling about in a circle. I'm like, well, those aren't mullet. They were kind of grayish color. I knew they weren't snook. So I got a little white snook fly tied on. I'm looking at them. I'm like, those look like they're redfish, but they're really big. I mean, they're like 27, 28 inches. They're decent sized redfish right here in the surf. I mean, water's breaking. They're right there. So I go ahead and I dump a cast in there. Don't get anything. Dump another cast. One follows it. I can't see what it really is. Dump another cast and I hook up. And I pull this thing out. And this fish will haunt me forever. The trout was probably about that long, but it was this thick. I had my hands on it one time. I pulled it up on the surf, and I went to reach down and slipped and lost. So I didn't want to break the rod, so I'm like moving around, and as I'm moving around, a big wave, because there was no waves at all, a big wave comes right then, takes the fish, and he goes with the wave, hook pops. Easily a 7-pound trout. Would have been my biggest trout on fly if he wasn't bigger. And this is no fish story. This fish will haunt me forever. And that's a great way to break into fly fishing. Snook on the beach, jacks, ladyfish, trout. And you don't have to get real technical. You don't have to spend a ton of money in fly fishing to be able to get into it. I can tell you this much: if it's something you think you're going to get into, buy something that's decent. Because if you go cheap, like I did when I first started off, within 4 months I was upgrading. But there are a lot of ways that you guys can break into fly fishing and really get a lot out of it and enjoy the sport and catch a lot of fish to kind of cut your teeth on it. And then you can start doing some of the more technical stuff. The spot I told you about on the backside of Perico, I would take 3 clouds or minnows and chartreuse and white. By the end of the day, all I had left was bare hooks and a weight, because the trout would just whack the mess out of them. Actually, the only snook red trout slam came out of that spot, backside of Perico. But jacks are a lot of fun on fly. They pull hard. The Spanish mackerel are all on the outside markers out here. They'll take a fly, 6-weight fly rod, and a Spanish mackerel made for each other, because you would think you had on 20-pound snook the way they pull.
What do you use the 8-weight for?
When I have to use it, I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong. The 8-weight, I'll usually use this. Obviously, if it's windier, I'm going to throw the 6. I'll throw the 8. And the 8-weight, I'll put something weighted. Again, with thinking about tonight, and thinking about winter time and the low tides and the trout and redfish, I kind of set up as an example. On the 6-weight, it's going to have a much lighter, more delicate presentation. It has a bonefish taper line on it, which means it has a shorter head, so it's more designed to throw small bonefish flies. And usually when I throw the 6-weight, I'm throwing very small crab patterns of some sort. And you can pass that around if you want. Very small crab patterns. Because my 6-weight is, I'm pretty much going to use the 6-weight predominantly as a sight casting setup. I'm on the front, I'm on the back boat, someone's on the front, or someone's on the front, I'm on the back, and I'm on the front. And we're not going to cast till we see a fish. And usually I'm throwing a very small crab pattern. I like to throw this setup for sheep's head as well. So I'm usually throwing something smaller, and that bonefish line has a shorter head, so it's able to throw the smaller flies, kind of like, in the Bahamas, they throw the gotchas and the crazy charlies and whatever they throw out there. So in thinking about this, because of the shallow water, I put on a weightless olive-colored seducer, which lands very soft. It kind of suspends and breathes in the middle part of the water column. So if you're fishing in 6 to 8 inches of water, you got a fish laid up. That fly is going to be sitting somewhere right here. It's going to be right in the fish's face. And it pushes, it has some body. On the 8-weight tonight, I put on this fly, it's called a razzmatazz in a brown color. Again, natural colors. 8-weight, I'll usually use that if I'm going to throw something weighted. And thinking about the trout tournament, again, a lot of times you're working potholes for trout. And your potholes can be, 2 to 3 foot deep sometime. You want something with some weighted eyes that are going to get down. Something that's going to look very natural. In the presentation, it looks like a little crab or a shrimp or a marine worm, something like that. The other time I'll use the 8-weight, again, if it's too windy to throw the 6, I'll throw the 8. Usually, either way, I can find some floating in 5 inches of water. I can go back behind something, find some fishable water to be able to throw a fly with. The 8-weight will also get used around docks for snook at night, especially during the summertime. Leaders, and there's a lot of technical things. If you go to a local fly shop, whether you go to Tambound Fly, I think, does Bill Jackson's carry a fly here? I haven't been to Bill Jackson's in years. Flint Creek Outfitters, they just recently moved out to West Shore. They can get you set up with the technical aspects, but you don't have to make it as technical as possible. Sometimes people use the tapered leaders and they tie a bimini twist in it and they do this reverse Huff-Nagel and oversized Albright and they take it down and they put this tiny little fly to catch a speckled sea trout. Why? Just take this much for your butt section, this much for your class. Done. That's all you need to do. As far as your butt section, if you're just thinking about getting started in it, I use the 5 times rule. You use an 8-weight line. You want to try to have as close to the same diameter as your line. So I times it by 5, so my butt section is going to be 40-pound test. So that has a close diameter to the fly line. That way there's a seamless transfer of energy from your hand through the rod, through the line, to the leader, and then all the way through the tippet to the fly. Obviously with the 6-weight, I scale down to 30-pound. Usually I'm connecting my fly to straight 12 to 17-pound tippet, unless I know I'm being in an area.
So you're going straight from 30 to your tip?
No, I use perfection loops, so I loop it all together. But like on the 6-weight, I have 30 to, I don't remember what was on here, 30 to 20 to the 12 or 15, whatever it is. And then on the 8-weight, I'll do 40 to 20 to whatever small. Unless I'm fishing snook around docks, then I'll just do 40, 20, and then a bite tippet of 30, or sometimes I'll just put straight 30 on there. You're not, when you're fishing dock snook, it's hand-to-hand combat. You're not really worried about class tippets and all this other stuff, unless your name is Dr. Martin Arosategi or whatever his name is that sets every record on the planet. You want to pull that snook out, because when you throw a fly into the dock, you strip it out, and he hits it, you're doing this and you're pegging that line and he's going back, and you get the electric spaghetti going on where he's zipping the line through your fingers and your fingers burning. If he gets you near that dock, it's usually game over. I think I've only pulled maybe 3 out from inside of a dock on fly. The rest of them, they were all outside, and I was able to pull them out. The current took them. Because I used to do a lot of dock snooking down in Jupiter. There's a lot of strong currents. Once you get them out, the current takes them. But if you get one of the big ones down there, they take you and it's over. Standard. We were talking earlier. Standard for Florida inshore fly fishing. 6 to 9-weight. Once you start getting your 10, 11, 12, you're talking about permit tarpon. Tarpon is a whole other story, and I am not close to being qualified enough to talk about that. Because I just do that for my own enjoyment. I don't even attempt to try and take people out and put them on tarpon, unless they're the little ones. But, if you start off with a 9-weight, once you get pretty good at it, and you start to enjoy it, you catch a couple fish, you're going to be wanting to get sporty with it. You're going to be like, oh, maybe I should try a 7. And you're going to try the 7. And you're like, all right, maybe I should try a 6. And then you're like, well, you know what? My dad has an old 5-weight that he used to lay around. Let me go play. And you start going smaller and smaller because it's more of a fun fight, you know. And you're able to make a real delicate presentation. But it's, you know, if it's something you've never tried, you know, again, I say it with, make sure you've caught all the fish you want to catch on spin tackle before you decide to really get into it, because I have this conversation with people all the time. You know, I want to get into fly fishing, First thing I ask them, have you caught everything you want to catch on spin tackle? Because your numbers are going to be low, but the numbers you do get, you will remember them. So, any questions? Fly fishing, spin tackle, trout tournament. I'm not going to tell you where that place is. I don't care. Chinese water torch me, I won't. Yes, sir.
Are the drags on fly reels the same basic principle as spinning reels? It seems like every time I see a show, it's like they stick it and it's just gone. It's like there's no stopping them.
It depends on what you're tackling. I try.
Catfish on fly. That's when you fit it.
You know what? Hey, don't laugh. I was in the Banana River one day on in a canoe with a buddy of mine. I had my 6-weight. I couldn't see I couldn't find a redfish. So I'm like, there was freaking hardhead cats tailing everywhere. I finally said, oh, screw it. Done. You know, just to bend the rod. Usually, unless you get a really decent sized fish, a lot of times you don't even get them on the reel. The only time you see the reel screaming is if you have a really big, like a snook or a redfish. And even the snook, a lot of times you end up stripping them in. It's more hand-to-hand combat. Redfish, a lot of times, you know, you'll fight them, you play them, you let the line run through, and then you reel it up, then you fight them on the reel to feel it. But really, unless it's a big fish that does that initial run, like a bonefish or a permit or a tarpon, you're not going to get that screaming thing. Pretty much, the way the fly rod and the fly reel works is that you want to try to maximize pressure. Fish in the water are going to weigh 10% of their weight. So, a 120-pound tarpon in salt water weighs 12 pounds. In theory, according to Andy Mill, I've seen him do it 100 times on TV, if you can put 12 pounds of pressure on a tarpon, you'll whip him pretty quick. Get on top and keep 12 pounds of pressure. It's hard to keep 12 pounds of pressure. For redfish, snook, and trout, you're talking, what, 4 or 5 pounds of pressure, maybe? It also depends on your tip. If you're using very light tippets, if you're using an 8-pound tippet, 12-pound tippet, yeah, you might want to set your drag a little light, you know, so that way, you know, you might have to let them run to wear themselves out, especially in the wintertime. Again, the water is much more oxygenated. The fish are going to be a little bit more spunky. They're going to put up a little bit more of a fight. Snook, I don't like to put snook on the reel, because if I let them get on the reel, that means that's more time they've been on the hook, and that's more time they can try and get that line under that gill plate. And don't think they don't know what they're doing. I've seen them do that with their heads trying to cut that thing off. So usually you're trying to strip them in, kind of like what trout fishermen do. You know, again, your bigger species, your species that run, yeah, you're gonna get them on the reel pretty quick. And that's where line management comes in. You know, you get one, and you're sitting there peeling the line off, letting it go, and then it's on the reel, and then you're fighting. But again, you know, cobia, I'm sure on fly, they'll get you in your drag. You know, when they start running big jacks, they'll get you in your drag. And decent size red. If I got a 30-inch redfish on this 6-weight, I'm gonna be there a while. And that's gonna be fun. And he's going to get into the drag. He's probably going to get into the backing, which is the other thing too. Just because you get him on the drag, you might still have the line in there. You may not even get him to the backing. I've only had one fish on the flats get me in the backing, and that was a 42.5-pound black drum in the Banana River, and it was on an 8-weight, and he got me probably about 150 yards out before I finally turned him. And I think the only reason why I turned him was because all the gators came in the water because he was making all sorts of commotion. That was a fun day. But usually you're not going to get them that far into the drag. And also the other thing too, when you're fishing in the shallow water, like in the wintertime, they don't have a whole lot of water to take off in. They're going to, wallow around and stick their face in the mud and try and knock that fly out. They're going to flop around. They're not really going to go on those runs that they would when there's more water. I mean, we're catching fish in 7 inches of water. Unless he goes taking off that way, there ain't a whole lot he's going to be able to. You're just going to sort of waller around there, and you're going to sit there and pull him in, and he might take off a little bit, and you'll pull him back, and you do this tug of war thing until eventually he lays over, and that's it. Bigger fish, a little bit deeper water, they can get ahead of steam, they can take off, and sometimes they'll put you on the drag. But I try not to get fish on the drag as much as possible. I want to try and get them in and then get them back in the water as quickly as possible. Any other questions? Oh, come on.
Have you ever gone north to fish? I say North Canada or Alaska, anything like that?
No. I want, being from Connecticut, we have a big striped bass fishery up there. My dream, I have yet to go. I want to go to the inside flats of Cape Cod and fish for stripers. Up there, they actually have, there's a very small contingency of guides up in Cape Cod who fish out of pulling skiffs for striped bass, and they'll pull the flats for striped bass. And actually, it's funny. I just sold the first Ancona SUV that's going to south end of Long Island, and the guy wants to use it to fish for stripers on the flats on Long Island. So that'll be the first one of those up in that area, because they can pull the flats and work the flats for stripers on that incoming tide. But when you get inside of Cape Cod, it's really like fishing. It's like fishing for bonefish, because the water gets crystal clear, and you can actually sight fish, decent sized stripers coming in and out of the estuary there. And they do it in some of the estuaries on the south end, which is Monomoy, and they do it on the inside of Cape Cod, and I think they also do it around Chatham too. So I'd like to go up there and do it. I'd love to try muskie on fly. I think that'd be a lot of fun because those things are freaking huge. But I've never been up to Alaska. A friend of mine over on the East Coast, John Comiskey, he works Alaska every summer, or has been for the last couple of years, I think. He's told me about it a couple times. He says, "You need to come up there."
The
It's
cool
awesome.
part of it is, we did a cruise 4 years ago, and one of the stops, I can't remember where it was now.
Saskatchewan.
You could take it was Juneau.
Saskatchewan.
You got a float plane flight in 45 minutes. They did one side of the river in, and then when you came out, they did the other side of the river, so you got to see something different.
Right.
Came up on where we were going to fish, get out, get all the gear. The kid may have been somewhere between 25 and 30 years old, and the 5 guys were all my age, and we're just like ready to chase down the stairs to the Christmas, knowing for sure there's bicycles there. So anyway, he stops. He's got this shotgun from over his shoulder. He says, "Fellas," he said, "stay right here a minute. I gotta go check this beach, make sure there aren't any bears."
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen those.
I have a
pictures.
I have a picture of a paw print that I'm not kidding you would cover most the back of that chair.
Yeah.
It had been there that morning and filleted about a 26-inch pink salmon.
From the gills to the tail.
Yeah,
It was
it
perfectly
got
filleted.
nothing but the little piece of head and a little piece of tail. Was that?
I have a friend of mine. He's part of Tampa Bay. Frank Rhodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frank Rhodes. And this guy, he's one of my favorite people. He has been everywhere, done everything, and fished for everything that you can imagine. This is the only guy that I know who could surf on a submarine with an 8-weight fly rod hooked up to a 2,100-pound great white shark with a shoulder wound and land the fish. The stories that this guy tells, I mean, they're not that astronomical, but he has some of the most amazing stories. He's fished all over, and all of his stories are true. It drives me insane. This guy, he used to be a teacher at Auburndale High School, taught ag, I think. He goes up to the Arctic, and he actually helped develop a cast that enables you to stand up against a cliff, go up, come down, and he's catching Arctic char doing it. He goes down to Mexico all the time, and he comes back with just these amazing stories, and all he does is fly fish. That's it. And it's really cool to hear some of the places they've been. It drives me nuts because I'm like, so Frank, where you been this past month? Oh, I'm getting ready to go back down to Mexico. I just got back from the Arctic. And
He just got back from the Amazon.
yeah, he's at the Amazon. Yeah, I saw him when we did our red fly tournament. He was down here at Shell Key fishing kayaks, and we were pulling out, heading back. And I'm like, so, hey Frank, where you been? Getting ready. I just got back from the Amazon. Be going to Mexico this summer, and probably hit the Arctic sometime in the fall. I'm like, you live a charmed life. He's a retired school teacher. So I guess that's what I have to look forward to.
Well, the point of telling this story is that three of the guys had barely knew which end of the fly rod to hold.
Right.
So he took 15 minutes with them.
Yeah.
Took 5 minutes with two of us. We pretty much, all he wanted was 9 to 3, or
10 to 2.
no, he wanted 12 to 9. Because all he did was, the water was coming at you.
Oh, okay.
All you had to do was just keep up.
Right.
And that was easy enough to do. And those guys, within 25 minutes of putting rods in reins, all 5 of us were hooked up,
Right.
screaming like, if you catch a male, they're sort of long and thin, similar to a snook or whatever. And then the females are closer to a Jack Breville.
Right.
You can tell them instantly. But that 12, no.
Were you using spay rods or skagit rods, or do they have a long
Whatever
hand?
the guy-
They have a long hand on the back. Is it two-handed cast?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I mean, with the fly rods, the fundamental behind this piece of instrument is all transfer of energy. You go to all sorts of different casting instructors. They'll tell you 10-2. They'll tell you to hold the book under your arm and cast like this. Pretty much, if you can get it out 30 feet, you can catch a fish. Most of the fish that you're going to sight cast on fly are going to be within 40 feet or more. Sometimes you get these situations where you might have to make a 50, 60 foot cast. Your percentages are going to be lower, but if you can make that cast, at least you can get there. Usually, I mean, think about our sight line when we're on a boat. I can probably see a fish laid up from here to that door, and I can put the cast on them, work it, and all that. But usually, my casts are from here to Tiger. Done. If you can get it out there, you've got a shot, And it doesn't take a whole lot of false casts because the way these lines and rods are designed, they're designed to minimize false casts. I upline my rods.
But you know what? There's no fish up there.
Exactly. And the other thing too, if you're starting off, I recommend a lot of people to overline their rod. So this is an 8-weight rod. I got 9-weight line, 6-weight rod, 7-weight line. And what that does is because it's a heavier line, it's going to transfer that energy quicker through the rod. So I can pick up my fly, one cast, and I'm there. I don't have to do all this number to get it all worked up. So there's little tricks and little nuances that you can do to ease things along once you're starting. But I can tell you this much. If you do it, the first fish you catch sight casting on fly, it's over. It's done. You've been warned, and it will. My wife told me one night, I was dreaming about tarpon. My wife told me I was sitting there doing this in my sleep, setting the hook. It's that nerve-wracking, insane fishing because it's just a whole other animal, because everything is so visual. And the flies, we match the hatch. Anything brown that gets down, looks like a shrimp or a crab, you put it in front of a redfish, chances are you'll probably eat it. Out on the beaches for snook in the summertime, something small, white, like a little bait fish or a little DT special, Grassets, flats minnow, anything like that, you'll be able to catch snook on fly. And the snook on fly, they're relatively easy because when they're bunched up on the beaches, you'll see the one big female, which those won't ever eat. Well, they will, but it's harder because the little small guys are right behind her, trailing her. They'll be the ones that will beat her to the fly. But that's a great way to cut your teeth because you don't need to make a long cast.
Isn't Grasset considered one of the best, like John?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know exactly when, but they'll have the schedule of the seminars at
Yeah.
the Sergeant Show, and he is going to do a casting seminar.
Yeah, Rick, they used to, I mean, I remember back in the day when they did outdoor, I always would go because I'd go see Lefty and Flip and them. But Rick is an amazing fly fishing guide down in Sarasota Bay. And he does a lot of tarpon and sometimes, you know, there's not many fly guides around here. You know, John is one. I do it part-time. I don't even lump myself with those guys. You know, tarpon, you know, you've got Nick Angelo, Brian Chamberlain, Greg Peterson, Dave Schwinard. Those guys, they are the premier tarpon on fly guides in this area. If you're wanting to do it, you need to call one of those guys because you'll see them driving up and down I-75 every day from pretty much April to the end of June. And then you'll see them again going hard and heavy at the end of July when they come back in post-spawn. And these guys are working tarpon every single day, getting guys booking them 2, 3, 4 days in a row. Because we have a very short period of good tarpon on fly. Here in the bay, there's opportunities to catch tarpon on fly. Big tarpon. You just got to know where those resident fish hang out. Water temperature in the bay hits 74, you're going to start seeing them. I know where there's a very large concentration of tarpon right now, and eventually I know they got to come out of there. It's just being at the right time, at the right place when they decide to come out of there and go out in the bay. And they'll stick out like sore thumbs on that white sand. Because eventually that water in that power plant is going to get too hot for them. They got to come out. You know, your juvenile tarpon, they're a lot of fun. You can find them, little manatee, alafia, big manatee, you know, any little creeks, rivers, wherever you think there would be a fish, tarpon will live there. They're able to suck in that oxygen and live in the dingiest, lousiest water there is. And they were made, that fish was made for the fly rod. But definitely, you know, if it's something you're interested in doing, it may cost you a few bucks, but you definitely want to get with somebody who's done it before that can at least, you know, show you. We can show you how to cast. They can show you how to cast a fly rod at the shop, but you need to go with someone experienced who can teach you how to fish with the fly rod because they're two totally different things. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
When you come in, well, I gotta tell you what I do. When I come in, salt water, I strip everything off the reel, rinse it, let it dry, put it back on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that necessary?
I'm borderline Sheldon Cooper OCD, so Big Bang Theory.
God.
Yeah. So I usually, when I come home after fishing, I strip all the line off, spray it off